The estate of the Whitmore family sat high on a hill outside Atlanta, a white-columned mansion surrounded by manicured gardens and marble fountains. It was the kind of place that spoke of generations of privilege, where silver was polished weekly and the air always smelled faintly of lavender and wealth. Inside, the household buzzed with quiet tension. Elaine Whitmore, elegant and severe, stood in the foyer holding a folded letter. Her husband, Charles, lingered by the staircase, watching the scene unfold but saying nothing. Across from them stood Grace Turner, a black woman in her early 50s, the family's nanny for over a decade. She wore her usual Navy uniform, her hands clasped in front of her, eyes steady but sad. Elaine's voice was clipped. "Grace, we've decided to make a change. Now that Jonathan's older, we feel it's time for him to transition into more formal schooling. You've been with us a long time." Grace nodded slowly. "Yes, ma'am. 11 years, come spring." Elaine avoided her gaze. "You've been compensated fairly. We'll, of course, provide a reference if needed." Charles cleared his throat. "Grace, it's not personal. We're simply moving in a different direction." Grace's expression didn't change, but her voice carried quiet strength. "A different direction, I understand." She looked toward the staircase, where Jonathan, a 12-year-old boy with tousled blonde hair, stood watching, confusion and disbelief etched across his face. "Mom," he called, "you're firing Grace?" Elaine's tone softened. "Jonathan, darling, she'll still visit sometimes. You'll see her again." But Jonathan shook his head. "You can't just... She's family." Grace smiled gently, walking over to him. Now, don't fuss, sweetheart. You got big things ahead of you. You're gonna do great." She bent down, brushing a stray lock of hair from his forehead. "Just remember what I always told you. Kindness first, always." Tears welled in his eyes. "I don't want a new nanny. I want you." Her voice caught. "Hush now. You'll make me cry." Elaine turned away, her jaw tightening. "Jonathan, please go to your room." He hesitated, glancing between them, then stormed up the stairs. "This is wrong," he shouted before disappearing down the hall. The silence that followed was thick. Grace straightened, turning back to Charles and Elaine. "I raised that boy since he was in diapers," she said softly. "And I'll keep praying for him, no matter what decisions you make." Elaine folded her arms. "That won't be necessary." Grace gave a small, bittersweet smile. "Oh, I reckon it always is." She picked up her coat and worn leather purse from the entryway chair. "Thank you for the years, Mr. Whitmore, Mrs. Whitmore." Then she stepped out into the chilly morning, the sound of the door closing behind her echoing through the vast, quiet house. That night, the mansion felt emptier. Jonathan refused dinner, his room still littered with the toy trains and comic books Grace had once helped him organize. Downstairs, Elaine poured herself a glass of wine, her movements sharp, restless. She was becoming too familiar, she muttered. He needs discipline, not sentiment. Charles didn't reply. He sat staring into the fireplace, remembering how, during long business trips, Grace had been the one who made sure Jonathan did his homework, ate his vegetables, said his prayers. She was part of this family, he said quietly. Elaine's gaze hardened. She worked for this family, he sighed. Sometimes I wonder if you can tell the difference. Her glass paused mid-air. Excuse me? But Charles said nothing more. He rose, walked to the window, and stared out at the dark lawn. In the distance, faintly, he could see Grace's small figure walking down the hill, her silhouette framed against the city lights. He had the uneasy feeling they'd just let go of the best thing that ever happened to them. The weeks after Grace left the Whitmore estate were colder than usual. Winter had come early, and though the mansion was always warm, Jonathan felt a kind of chill that no fireplace could fix. His new nanny, Miss Carla, was young, proper, and painfully distant. She wore crisp skirts, spoke in a clipped accent, and treated Jonathan like a polite inconvenience. She never laughed at his jokes, never stayed up to read bedtime stories, and never cooked his favorite grits the way Grace used to, with butter, cinnamon, and just a pinch of love. At night, Jonathan would lie awake and stare at the glow-in-the-dark stars on his ceiling, the ones Grace had helped him stick there years ago. She'd told him, "Whenever you miss somebody, look at the stars. That's where prayers live." He whispered to them now, quietly, "Please let me see her again." Meanwhile, on the other side of town, Grace had started over. She found work as a cook at a community daycare. Smaller pay, longer hours, but full of laughter and life. The children adored her. She brought warmth into every room she entered, humming old gospel songs as she ladled soup or tied shoelaces. But every now and then, she'd pause by the window when the school bus passed by, wondering if Jonathan was looking out too. She missed him terribly, but she knew she had to let him grow, even if it broke her heart. Then, one Saturday morning, while she was unpacking groceries, there came a knock at her door. She wiped her hands on her apron, opened it, and froze. Jonathan? The boy grinned up at her, breathless from running, his cheeks flushed from the cold. Hi, Grace. Lord have mercy, she whispered, pulling him into a hug. What are you doing here? How'd you find me? He held up a piece of paper. Your address was on one of the Christmas cards you sent Mom. I borrowed it. Borrowed, she repeated, raising an eyebrow. He shrugged. I missed you. Her expression softened. Oh, honey, I missed you too. But your mama, she doesn't know I'm here, he interrupted quickly. Please don't tell her. She won't let me come if she finds out. Grace sighed, torn between duty and love. But when she saw the desperate hope in his eyes, her resolve melted. All right, but you can't keep sneaking out like this. You could have gotten hurt. He grinned sheepishly. Worth it. She laughed, that warm, familiar laugh that filled her tiny kitchen the way sunlight used to fill the Whitmore's mansion. Well, if you're going to risk trouble, at least let me make you breakfast. He watched as she cooked, amazed at how everything, the smell of butter, the sound of her humming, felt like coming home. Grace, he said suddenly, his voice small, Mom says you were just an employee, but I think you were more like my family. Grace turned to look at him, eyes soft with emotion. I'll always be your family, baby. Blood don't decide that. Love does. For months after that, Jonathan found excuses to visit. Sometimes he'd tell his driver he was going to study group or music lessons, and instead, he'd end up at Grace's apartment, helping her at the daycare, reading to the kids, or sharing lunch at her tiny kitchen table. Grace worried about him getting caught, but she couldn't bring herself to turn him away. She saw something in him. Kindness, humility, a spark she hadn't seen before. She knew that spark was what made him special, what made him different from his parents. And slowly she realized that maybe, just maybe, her purpose wasn't behind those mansion gates anymore. Her purpose was here, in teaching, nurturing, and guiding the next generation, no matter where they came from. But secrets have a way of coming out. One afternoon, as Jonathan was helping Grace carry boxes of donated clothes into the daycare, a sleek black car pulled up outside. The door opened and Elaine Whitmore stepped out, her heels clicking sharply on the pavement. The color drained from Grace's face. Oh, Lord! Jonathan froze, guilt flooding his expression. Mom! Elaine's voice cut through the air, cold and precise. Get in the car, Jonathan. He didn't move. No. Her eyes blazed. Excuse me? I'm not leaving until you apologize to her, he said, his chin trembling but his voice steady. She didn't deserve what you did. For a long moment, the street was silent. The wealthy mother, the humble nanny, and the boy standing between two worlds. Grace placed a gentle hand on his shoulder. It's all right, sweetheart. Go on now. But he shook his head. No, it's not all right. Elaine's lips pressed into a thin line. Get in the car. And for the first time in his life, Jonathan didn't listen. He turned to Grace and said softly, I'm staying. Elaine stared at him, speechless, and for the first time, uncertain. The daycare fell into silence. The children, sensing tension, peeked from the playroom doorway, their small faces curious and afraid. Elaine Whitmore stood frozen in her expensive heels, her flawless composure cracking under the weight of her son's defiance. She wasn't used to being challenged, not by her staff, and certainly not by her child. Jonathan Whitmore, she said sharply, voice trembling with fury, you will not speak to me like that. Get in the car this instant. Jonathan's jaw clenched, but he didn't move. You fired her for no reason. You said she didn't belong with us, but she's the only one who ever cared about me. Grace gently squeezed his shoulder. Hush, baby. Don't talk to your mama that way. Elaine's eyes flicked to Grace, cold as glass. You had no right to see him behind my back. Grace met her gaze calmly. I didn't plan it, ma'am. But I wasn't about to turn away a child standing alone on my porch. Elaine stepped closer. You think you're noble for defying me? No, ma'am, Grace said softly. I think I'm human. The simplicity of the words stopped Elaine short. Her son looked up at her, tears brimming. You always say people should have class and dignity. Grace has both, and you treated her like she was nothing. Jonathan, that's enough, Elaine snapped. You don't understand. No, he interrupted, his voice cracking. You don't. Grace turned him gently by the shoulders. Sweetheart, go inside for a minute, all right? Let me talk to your mama. He hesitated but obeyed, casting one last look at his mother before disappearing into the daycare. Now, it was just the two of them. Elaine crossed her arms, trying to regain control, but Grace could see the storm behind her eyes. Pride fighting guilt, anger masking something deeper. You have no idea what it's like, Elaine said finally, her voice quieter. The expectations, the pressure. People watch everything we do. My husband's reputation, Grace interrupted softly. I know what pride feels like, ma'am, but I also know what love feels like. And I reckon your boy needs a whole lot more of the second and a little less of the first. Elaine's lips parted in disbelief. You presume to lecture me about parenting? Grace didn't flinch. I raised that child for 12 years. I know what he eats when he's sad. I know what nightmares make him cry. I know the sound of his laugh when he's happy, and the way he holds his breath when he's scared. You might have given him your name, Mrs. Whitmore, but I gave him my heart. The words hung between them, heavy and raw. For the first time, Elaine's facade began to crack. She blinked, eyes glistening. You think I don't love my son? Grace shook her head. I think you love him the way the world taught you to, through rules and image and success. But children don't need perfect homes, ma'am. They need safe hearts. Elaine's throat tightened. No one had ever spoken to her that way. Not her husband, not her friends, not even her own parents. And though the words stung, something deep inside her recognized the truth in them. She turned toward the daycare windows and saw Jonathan inside, helping one of the toddlers build a tower out of blocks. He was laughing, freely, fully, like she hadn't seen in months. Grace was right. He was safe here. Elaine's voice softened. I thought I was protecting him. From the world, from judgment, from... She hesitated, struggling to find the word. From people who weren't like us. Grace folded her arms gently. And what exactly are you like, Mrs. Whitmore? Elaine blinked, startled. Grace continued. You've got money, sure. Big house, fancy car. But none of that fills the cracks in a soul that forgot how to love without conditions. You didn't need to protect your son from the world, ma'am. You needed to protect him from becoming like it. The silence that followed was the kind that changes people. Elaine's shoulders sagged. For once, she didn't have a rebuttal. She whispered, I've made a terrible mistake. Grace smiled softly, the same warm, steady smile that had once soothed a crying baby at 3 a.m. It's never too late to fix one, ma'am. But the first step's the hardest. That's the one where you admit you're wrong. Elaine looked down, her voice barely a whisper. How do I fix this? Grace took a slow breath. You start by telling your boy you're sorry. Not with words from your mouth, but from your heart. That evening, Jonathan waited outside the daycare with Grace, watching the sunset paint the sky in gold. When Elaine came out, her eyes were red but calm. She walked up to her son, knelt, and said quietly, Jonathan, I'm sorry. I was wrong to take Grace away. I was wrong about so many things. He looked at her, tears streaming silently down his cheeks. Then he threw his arms around her neck. I just wanted you to see her the way I do. Elaine held him tightly, her voice breaking. I do now. Grace turned away, wiping her own tears. For once, the ache in her chest felt lighter. As the three of them stood together beneath the fading light, it felt like something in the Whitmore family had shifted. A door had opened that could never again be closed. And for the first time, maybe ever, Elaine didn't feel like the richest woman in the world. She just felt grateful. Years passed, quietly but meaningfully. The white columns of the Whitmore estate still gleamed in the Georgia sun, but something within those walls had changed. The air was lighter now, warmer, filled with laughter instead of restraint. The house no longer felt like a museum of pride, but like a home that finally understood love. Jonathan grew taller, his shoulders broader, his smile more confident. He was no longer the timid boy who hid behind Grace's apron or stared out the window when she left. He had become a young man, thoughtful, kind, and fiercely compassionate. He still visited Grace often, spending weekends helping her at the daycare, fixing leaky faucets, and reading to the children. Elaine had tried to accompany him once, at first out of obligation, but something in that place softened her too. The sight of Grace surrounded by laughing children, her voice warm, her patience endless, made something inside Elaine ache. Slowly, she began helping as well. At first, she just donated supplies. Then she stayed longer, helping Grace file paperwork or organize fundraisers. Before long, they found themselves laughing together over coffee, two women from different worlds who had somehow become family. One summer afternoon, as the cicadas hummed outside and the daycare buzzed with children's chatter, Grace felt dizzy. She brushed it off at first, blaming the heat. But when she collapsed near the kitchen counter, Elaine and Jonathan were both there to catch her. The diagnosis came quickly: congestive heart failure. The doctor said she'd been ignoring the symptoms for too long. She stayed in the hospital for weeks, her strength fading but her spirit steady. Elaine and Jonathan visited every day. He read her favorite scriptures out loud, and Elaine brought homemade food she'd learned to cook, recipes Grace had taught her years before. The woman who had once dismissed Grace as the help now sat by her bedside, holding her hand like a sister. One night, as the monitors beeped softly, Grace looked at Jonathan and smiled. "You're a good man now," she said, her voice weak but full of pride. "I always knew you would be." He gripped her hand tighter. "Because of you." She chuckled faintly. "Because of God's plan, child. I just happened to walk alongside you for a bit." Elaine wiped her tears silently. Grace turned to her and whispered, "You did good too, ma'am." Elaine shook her head, choking on her words. "No, I was cruel to you. Grace interrupted gently. "You learned. That's what matters. You opened your heart. You let love in. Don't waste the rest of your life feeling sorry for the first half." Tears streamed down Elaine's face as she leaned forward and hugged her, something she had never done before. "I love you, Grace." Grace smiled, her eyes fluttering closed. "I know, baby. I love you too." That was the last time Elaine ever heard her speak. The funeral was small but beautiful. The daycare children brought flowers they had picked themselves. Parents cried quietly in the back rows. Jonathan gave the eulogy, steady, heartfelt, and full of gratitude. "She wasn't just my nanny," he said, voice trembling. "She was my family. She taught me that love doesn't need permission, that it's not about where you come from or how much money you have. It's about what you give. She made me who I am." Elaine stood beside him, tears streaming freely. And when it was her turn to speak, she said something no one expected. "I once thought grace was something you earned, through success, reputation, or power. But I learned that grace is something you receive, even when you don't deserve it. And sometimes," she paused, smiling through her tears, "grace comes to you wearing a blue uniform and a smile that feels like home." The crowd wept openly. Years later, Jonathan became a firefighter, strong, brave, and selfless. When reporters asked him after a daring rescue why he risked his life for strangers, he said simply, "Because someone once showed me that helping people is the best way to live." Elaine, now older and gentler, turned the old daycare into the Grace Turner Foundation, offering childcare and scholarships for single mothers and working families. On the front wall, a plaque bore Grace's favorite saying, "Kindness first, always." Every morning, as children played in the courtyard and laughter filled the air, Elaine would sit on the porch and watch the sunrise. She often imagined Grace sitting beside her, humming softly, smiling that same patient smile. And sometimes, when the wind rustled through the trees just right, she could almost hear her voice whispering, "You did good, ma'am." Elaine would smile, eyes glistening, and whisper back, "No, Grace, you did. You